Wait to come out from behind the All right, we're live there. Let's check. Here, we're live here. All right, we hit this button. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the development cycle for Baldur's Gate 3. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games. And this is an interesting. I mean, I've been playing Baldur's Gate pretty much nonstop for 2 weeks, as much as I possibly can. Obviously, you had Gen Con for that first week of Baldur's Gate, but then over the last week you played a bunch of Baldur's Gate.
Yes, yeah. Over the last week, I played let me see. 12 hours, which isn't crazy,
Okay.
but it's a lot.
Sure. Yeah. I think I'm at like 60 hours or something like that. But also, theoretically, I've played in a couple of different maybe I'm like 40 hours in my main game, something like that. I don't want to talk too much about the actual game. I think people are still working through it. You're obviously still working
Yeah.
through it. There's a lot of spoiler stuff, and I have to say, just like off the bat, something about Baldur's Gate that I truly believe it is so good if you just approach it neutrally, right? I think looking some stuff up, maybe after the fact, I've done this a little bit where I've kind of checked a hypothesis, like after I've exited an area, and I wonder, hey, I wonder if there was something to this like piece, and maybe I'll like look into that or whatever. But I think that the game comes alive when it allows you to just sort of experience it on your own and figure this stuff out
Yeah.
on your own, right? It is way more fun, in my opinion. I want to preserve that for people, so I don't want to talk too much about the specifics of the actual game itself, outside of just kind of like the early open experience. The thing that I'm interested in when it comes to Baldur's Gate, for at least today's podcast, is this conversation I've been seeing on Twitter, on Reddit, on some other places, where sort of the success of Baldur's Gate is. It's kind of asking people to think a little differently about the the nature of how games are made, right? Excuse me. I think there's a lot of folks who look at Baldur's Gate and they're like, why can't every game be like this, right? Like that seems to be like a really common um sort of idea. And but like the more I actually think about the specifics of what our world would look like if everybody kind of copied the Baldur's Gate style, it kind of be interesting and bad in my opinion. I guess that's sort of my thesis.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to see because there's like I think there's like a little bit more nuance to this, but like some of that's just kind of like it is what it is, right? Like, because I think I generally agree with you that it wouldn't be the greatest thing in the world, but I do think people also make a lot about. I think there are also some people who are too quick to excuse some of this stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how we break this down because like I do think that like live service games in perpetuity is also not a great way for gaming to go. And I don't think it has to be either or, but there's some stuff here, right? So why don't you launch into your point then?
Okay, so just to like set the stage a little, obviously Baldur's Gate is the biggest game. I'm like, right, it's one of those like it's breaking all these records, the highest concurrent players the team has ever seen 2 weekends in a row, right? Which is pretty insane, pretty huge. It is sort of it's funny because it is in two different ways a trilogy capper, right? It is both the third game in the Divinity Original Sin trilogy, essentially, right? Made in the same engine by the same developers. But it is also the third Baldur's Gate game, the first and second Baldur's Gates games, obviously coming out essentially 20 years ago, right?
Right.
Um, the big, I think, crazy news about Baldur's Gate kind of blowing up in this way is that it definitely shows this like sort of rabid hunger for really like deep and thoughtful like single player experiences, right? I feel like we've been seeing this with Dark Souls. I feel like we've been seeing this in other sorts of places, right? It's pretty
Tears of
clear
the
that there is
Kingdom.
a, yeah. And something that we had talked about a little bit with the Diablo, I feel like I'm eating a little bit of crow here, I guess is really what I'm trying to say. When we were talking about the Diablo stuff, I was saying that, look, development budgets are so fucking huge that making money on a huge project like this seems pretty tough these days, right? When I think about if I'm a mid-level publisher like Square Enix or something like that, right? um, when I'm thinking about the kinds of projects that I'm taking on, a lot of that those dollars are kind of getting cannibalized by essentially people like me, right, in the indie space. It's pretty easy for people to make a purchase at the $20 range on an indie title that feels pretty relevant to their interests, something like Slay the Spire, right? Um, and it is a bigger ask to do a bigger, purchase on anything that really that would kind of come out from these other sorts of publishers. And at the time, I had said a bunch of different things, and I sort of talked about how this seems to be why Diablo 4 is going with this sort of transitioning from that big upfront cost to like the games as a service kind of long-term model, essentially, right? Because now they're doing battle pass with their season. um Feels like Baldur's Gate has been, Tears of the Kingdom has been, like these are huge premium one-time drop games that just sort of do the job and give you everything that you're kind of looking for, right? Other examples of this are obviously stuff like Elden Ring, but I also even think that even some more modest stuff that has slipped through the cracks, like Star Wars Jedi Survivor or like Hogwarts Legacy. Um, all that stuff has also kind of been doing pretty good too. So I actually feel like the real story of the last 2 years has kind of been that these big single player games, there is something to them, and they're kind of working in like a normal-ish way. Um, but that has this side effect where it seems as though players are suggesting that the the Baldur's Gate sort of model for how to develop a game and how to like make a game is like a standard that they want to replicate, which I don't know if that's true or fair to the game. I don't know. I feel like I just like rambled really hard. Really what it seems is that there's a lot of people who look at Baldur's Gate and then compare it to other unfavorable titles and go, "Why couldn't this be that?" Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean it does. And I mean I think there are some legitimate arguments to that and some that are less legitimate, right? Like the thing that pops into my mind is Final Fantasy 16, very popular, sold well, but apparently disappointed the investors in Square Enix because it didn't like beat out like I guess Final Fantasy 7 remake or something. Like essentially it sold a lot of units, but like not enough to make the investors happy. And like maybe there's like an issue there, like, because as far as I know, like are movie companies publicly traded? Um
Yeah, some of them, like Disney or whatever.
okay, yeah, I guess like Disney and I guess Netflix counts. But like typically the production, like the actual like not the production houses, but like the studios that make the movies tend to not be. Right? Like people
Oh,
like
I see what you're saying. Yes, true. So a lot of the times what'll happen is a director's personal sort of company will get hired to make the project. So, for instance, for Netflix, I don't know, like the Zack Snyder one, I think they're called Stonecutter. Like it is Stonecutter Pictures, right? Which is Zack Snyder produced movies that he directs, right? It has a contract with Netflix to distribute Stonecutter movies, right? Or Amblin Entertainment would be another easy one, right? Amblin is Steven Spielberg's company. Amblin Entertainment cuts deals with whoever, Warner Brothers, Universal, right, to distribute the pictures that it creates.
yeah. And uh like I guess is Larian the publisher on Baldur's Gate 3 as well, or is somebody else
Oh, that's a
publishing?
good question.
Because
I feel like Larian is the publisher.
they might be, but like they're in this kind of space where they kind of can be, right? Like it feels like, and Final Fantasy 16 was in house, right?
Yeah,
Uh
they are the publisher, by the way.
okay, that makes sense, right? Like I feel like somebody like a Paradox or a Larian which is like small enough to like be able to kind of like guide their own destiny, can get away with these kinds of things. Whereas like um, an in-house published title from like a publicly held publisher is going to have a tougher time. In the same way that I think that there's issues with like in like in-house Disney movies and in-house Netflix movies that like basically the Marvel movies have to be blockbusters, right? Like Disney lost something like $410 million last year, um, uh, and like that's gonna put a cap on stuff like that. Like I'm not describing an opinion on this, just kind of like that's like kind of like why I think some of these, like to answer the question why can't every game be Baldur's Gate, I think the answer is because there are other pressures, right? Like Larian has the freedom to say we are going to invest the money that we made on previous two popular games in a what is effectively a moonshot, because we're convinced that we can sell this game and make a decent profit off of this, whereas like typically publicly held corporations just don't have the tolerance for that level of risk.
Yeah, so an interesting thing that is sort of a side tangent, but you brought up something that's kind of interesting and relevant to these strikes that are going on with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild. Um, a box office pundit who I like quite a lot, his name is Scott Mendelson. He was sort of talking about how streaming companies becoming their own kind of content production and delivery mechanisms has kind of fucked with the way that Hollywood politics and money works, right? Because with Hollywood, it is a culture of third parties, right? Everybody is working for somebody else, and therefore there's a lot of publicity to numbers, essentially, right? So, for instance, let's say I'm Nick Kroll, right? Nick Kroll has a production company. His production company is I don't know. It's like good for business or something like that. Whatever the name is of his production company is. Nick Kroll's production company makes the show Kroll Show, okay, and then he sells that show to Comedy Central, who orders a certain number of episodes, basically bankrolls the kind of the project, right? Comedy Central puts the project up. They have to report back to Nick Kroll what the ratings are, essentially on all that is pretty public information, right? Because these are two different business entities, Nick Kroll on one end, Comedy Central on the other, who have to do business with one another, and so they have to kind of be honest with one another about like their revenue. The thing about Netflix that is interesting is that Netflix is kind of subsuming the job of what Nick Kroll used to do, right? And is keeping its numbers much more in house, right? um, which is why they're striking essentially, because streamers don't release numbers like analytics data. They don't release the numbers on which you could base residuals if you were like a writer or something like that. And so nobody really kind of knows how well some of this, you excuse me, how well some of this stuff does at Netflix, because they're not public about that information. And not being public about that information is exactly the thing that kind of the writers and actors seem to be striking over, because they want the AMPTP to release that data, which could theoretically destroy their business if it is revealed. And a lot of people think this is true. If it's revealed that the shows that they're making are loss leaders, right? And that the money that Netflix has been investing into this kind of stuff is kind of just like pouring money down the drain, if that makes sense. That's a different sort of like relationship, but it's sort of interesting and tangential, and I wanted to explain a little bit about that because I had just done sort of just done the research. The thing that's interesting is that Larian is on the opposite end of that spectrum, right? People actually tend to look at, oh, there's no interference from a publisher, right? There's no voice from on high, which is not technically true. Larian did have a voice from on high, and that voice was Wizards of the Coast, right? They are playing around in the Wizards IP, but Hasbro is not publishing this project, right? Hasbro is licensing the project to Larian
Yeah,
to
Larian
make.
paid the license, right? Like they have Wizards has less control because it is not a Wizards project; it is a Larian project that has licensed out Wizards, right? Like there's probably some agreements. There's some what's the word? Like Faerun probably has to stay within the Faerun-ness of Faerun, but like otherwise they're probably pretty free to do what they want.
Yeah, I mean, there have been good versions and bad versions of this. Something that happened a couple of years ago that was pretty funny was there was a version of this with Marvel Studios where Marvel movies had to kind of get approval for the stuff that they were doing from the comics end of the business, which was just kind of insane boardroom politics, right? And notoriously, kind of the council of people who were involved in that were slow, they were indecisive, they were, kind of like catty, and eventually Marvel Studios was able to kind of free itself from those shackles, right? Um, so that's kind of a bad example of that sort of relationship. But there's also been good examples of that sort of relationship as well, right? Games Workshop, I actually would say, is that, right? I would actually make the argument that Games Workshop is more a company built around IP licensing than it is a company built around miniature war games, right?
Yeah, I would say like
Because
the idea that War Games Workshop is a good example of this is kind of contentious. You know, have you heard of if the Emperor had a text to speech device?
no, what is that?
So if the Emperor who had if the Emperor had a text to speech device, it was like a fan thing, right? It was like a funny parody. It's like the idea is like one of the, I think it's Adeptus Custodies, like installs a text to speech device on the Golden Throne, and the Emperor can finally talk again. And he's like, "What the shit?" Right? And it's a comedy series, right?
Oh, I see. Oh,
But
but then they were litigious about this, is what you're saying?
Games Workshop at some point like put out a new set of like content like creator rules, and they were extremely restrictive, and so basically everybody abandoned like I think the guy who does that's doing like a hunt show, no, World of Darkness thing now, because like Paradox paid him to do it, right? Like because they were like, you're not doing Warhammer anymore, come work for us, right? Like we'll help you out with that. But like the thing there being, yes, the point being that like Games Workshop, I will agree, is pretty good on its licensed stuff, but like that also like has
Yeah,
bad
really,
interactions
really,
on the
what
other
I'm
side of the coin.
really what I'm talking about is the way that Fat Shark. The two games I know of this are Fat Shark, which does Vermintide, Dark Tide, and games. I'm sorry, Creative Assembly, who does Total War Warhammer. Right? They talk about having very deep partnerships with Games Workshop, and how Games Workshop is really close to those projects in particular, even though they're doing the same thing. Right? It's just a licensing fee technically. Because Games Workshop is easy to deal with, I would argue that those two projects really benefit, right? Like I think
Sure.
Vermintide and Total War Warhammer 3 are both very true to form sort of representations of the Warhammer IP. And I bet a lot of that has to just kind of like do with Games Workshop being easy to work with when it comes to like their IP licensing to in fairness, other big companies, right? Like not to not to content creators, right?
So
Um
I do want to jump back to the Netflix thing real quick, just because like something occurred to me. Right, I was
sure.
recently also listening to something about this from Rob Long, who he was a writer on Cheers, and thus he's a member of the Writers Guild. And his opinion is basically like Netflix fucked the pooch by like making their own content. Right, the stuff that like streams the most is like reruns of Suits. Right, like reruns of network television are always the biggest things on like these streaming services. Um, and basically because Netflix decided it was gonna, because they were afraid that everybody else was gonna come and steal their business, they went there, made their own content, and this was a mistake. But we've talked previously about how um, Netflix doesn't give notes, right? Like that's a thing, right?
Yeah, that was a famous thing that was really attractive to creators. To be fair, this is really old information. It's possible Netflix has started
Yeah,
giving notes, but a bunch of people have talked about this. David Fincher said he liked working with Netflix, specifically on House of Cards, which was the show he developed for Netflix, because they didn't give him notes. Max Landis talked about Netflix not doing notes for, I want to say Dirk Gently, right? Was the
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
was the show that he was working on for or maybe it was Bright, which was obviously also a Netflix project, that he wrote. Yeah, so a bunch of people have said Netflix doesn't give notes on its projects. It kind of just like lets its creators run wild.
yeah, just I'm pretty sure it was Dirk Gently, because I think Max was the showrunner on Dirk Gently, whereas like Bright, he sold the script, and it pretty
Yeah, it's true. He
famously
sold the
is.
script to David Ayer, who
Yeah, yeah.
changed it a lot.
Yeah, changed it a lot, right? Like Max Landis won't say it's butchering because he refuses to like do it that way, but like that's kind of like the thought, right? Like this is like it's very different than his original vision. But point being is the Rob Long take is kind of like Netflix's fundamental model is they don't actually care about engagement with the content. They want a piece of content that will get you to sign up and then hope that you forget about that you're signed up for Netflix and aren't actually using it that much, right? And so they don't actually care about the quality of the content so much, just like that they can pull people in and then like drop it after 2 seasons. This is like a thing that like the only Netflix show that like runs for longer is like Stranger Things, and that's basically it.
Yeah.
And otherwise, do a bunch of one-off stuff. Either things that are naturally one-offs or things that could last for longer. They just cancel after 2 seasons. I think there's an economics reason on that too, right?
Yeah, because also syndication is what TV shows are typically looking for, right? Essentially, in the age of cable, reruns became a big deal, and cable companies wouldn't take rerun packages that didn't have a certain number of episodes, which was why 22 episode seasons were sort of standardized, because I think it was 90 or 100 episodes or something like that was what people were looking for. So if your show got to 5 seasons, 6 seasons, right? Now your Cheers, right? Your The Simpsons. Well, Simpsons is kind of a bad example. It's so insane. But like your Cheers, your Seinfeld, your Friends, you're one of these sort of shows. Now what you can do is you can sell that show into syndication. So I sell the syndication rights of to Friends to Comedy Central. Comedy Central is going to run Friends reruns on its, whatever, Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. or something, when it just doesn't have anything better to show, basically. Um, and you as an actor are getting residuals for those reruns, and you're getting those for life, right? So what an actor's kind of way to payday was to get on a show that gets to syndication. And basically they just, you know, they're printing money for the rest of their lives based on that. Netflix kind of destroys that model
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, because people don't watch TV, and the complex nature of, again, third parties, right? Having to be honest with your books in order to make deals with different parties, right? Friends developed by, I don't even fucking know, whoever, right? Sold to NBC when it's airing originally, and then syndicated on Comedy Central. Like all of these different third parties triangulating with one another to like pick up the rights to this sort of stuff. Those mean that you have to be honest with people about what your ratings are, or else you're committing fraud, right? But Netflix doesn't really have to do that, and can kind of just sort of lie about how much stuff is getting, like getting watched, getting seen, or whatever else.
Yeah, and
By
there's
all
there's
sorts
also
of.
kind of a question of like, what does a residual even mean, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, this is exactly the thing. For instance, you get a residual. I mean, it's crazy. You get a residual if a Nielsen family that keeps a little notebook of all the TV they're watching
it's an
says
automated thing. It's not a notebook. My parents were Nielsen people for like a hot minute, like a couple years
well, no,
ago.
no, no. This is what I mean.
Yeah.
In the 70s,
Oh,
right?
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
This is how residuals work. Some family writes down that they're watching your show, and then that gets extrapolated out to however many million people by Nielsen, which is his own independent agency, and then Nielsen is verifying. It's like there's all of that kind of thing. Well, now Netflix has theoretically the most accurate numbers, but like, what if I watch the first episode but no others, right? What if I watch 20 minutes of the first episode? What if I watch 10? When does the residual kick in, right? Like those are questions that have real answers. We didn't used to be able to track that stuff just because of technological limitations, but now we do. What do you do with that, right? I think those are all like really
Oh,
complicated questions that theoretically the strike is trying to put to rest.
also, just from like an economic standpoint, right? Like the reason a residual at some level makes sense is because if you're watching a show, you're exclusively watching that show along with the ads that go along with it, and so theoretically, you can like skim a piece of that ad revenue off the top and make the entire business is profitable for everybody, right? Like, the network gets to keep enough of it that it's worth for them to run it, and the residuals go to the actors, and they're not like driving the network bankrupt because they're taking too much of that piece of pie. Netflix, I think, has ads now, but like for a long time it didn't, right? And so like, what is watching one episode of, let's say, Friends mean, right? Does that mean that if that's the only thing you watch that much, are you entitled to like 40% of your $15 subscription, right? If it was one of like, if you watch, 700 episodes that month, right? Are you, entitled to like 40% of like the 15 cents that like, timeshare indicates, right? Like how, like you can't, like the economics of it can't make sense in a way, like don't make sense in the same way. And so it's like, even though the data's there, like the economic reality of it just kind of doesn't match up one to one, if that makes sense, right? Like you can't guarantee that it's going to be profitable, essentially.
Yeah, it is also Netflix kind of essentially tripped over a gold mine, right? Because however many years ago, people didn't really understand how huge streaming was going to get. This is
Yeah,
specifically around the turn of the 2010s, right? And so the rights to specifically like The Office, Arrested Development, and some of these TV shows that Netflix were able to pick up, they were able to pick up those rights for dirt cheap. Right when those contracts started expiring, right, and they had picked up these contracts at like really. The funny thing was the contracts were a writer. I don't remember why I know this history, but the contracts were the writer. Netflix was still a DVD sending you in the mail company, right? And what they were negotiating for was they were negotiating for bulk printings of D&D of DVD discs of these shows seasons because that was sort of their business at the time. And as a writer on that contract, they wanted to get the digital sort of syndication rights, right? And so I don't know what number this is in my head, but the number in my head is $650,000, right? Which is what I think which is what I think they paid for like The Office or maybe Arrested Development to stream one of those titles, a title that would go on to be absolutely fucking insane for Netflix, right? Obviously, that did that, that gold mine got mined real quick. People realized how valuable the streaming rights to their products were, and now you have Netflix is paying $100 million to get Seinfeld, right, or whatever it is. And I think that that's the big problem is that the price for Netflix was sort of determined before like before the real cost for some of this stuff came to the fore, and now Netflix is kind of paying the piper. They also took some really aggressive loans. They borrowed when they were still a $150 million company. They borrowed $1 billion to make content, which is, to be fair, I think the right move for them as a company. But it's a really aggressive loan that I kind of think just like leveraged the entire company on this sort of thing. I don't know. We'll see. This is like right of strike stuff,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is kind of different from Baldur's Gate. But I do think that it like ties in the sense that like the money behind this stuff drives a lot of this sort of decisions. And I think the real thing that I would say gamers are missing about the conversation when it comes to Baldur's Gate, right? Is you don't want it was my thesis. You don't want the Baldur's Gate development cycle because if a worse studio than Larian, right? Which we would probably say if I'm a gamer, I think most studios are bad. I typically am angry at developers. I think developers are mean, that they you know they're greedy, they're money grubbing, right? Like this is probably what a lot of players think about a lot of video game companies, right? If you sort of give them the tools that Larian had without sort of the trust that Larian had built up, you're in for a pretty bad time. Because Baldur's Gate was in early access for 2 years.
I think
And early
3.
access, oh, 3 years?
I think so. I think it can't, didn't it wasn't it released in like 2020 or something?
Okay, yeah, I actually do want to know. I mean, I know it was in development for 6 years, right? They started development in 2017. Um, how long was Baldur's Gate 3 in early access? Da, 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 da.
6 October 2020, so just under 3 years.
Okay, just under 3 years, right? So that thing
On
was in.
Stadia, or I shouldn't talk about that. Never mind.
Oh, it was on Stadia?
Yeah. So
No.
this is where I guess I should say I work for Google. I do not work on anything related to or adjacent to Stadia, but I probably shouldn't make fun of Stadia.
Well, didn't technically. Yeah. Well, I'm not gonna press.
Yeah, I probably can't answer the question. Not that I know anything more than anybody else, but like I'm supposed to. Yeah. Anyway, away from that. But yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Baldur's Gate 3 comes out in early access, and it's in early access for 3 years, which is sort of like I kind of feel like if you are the kind of gamer who thinks pre-orders are bad, this is a pretty typical thing. People say don't pre-order games, right? Because you aren't going to get what you pay for, right? People get let down by pre-order games all the time. Pre-orders were a pretty big deal. I would say probably 10 years ago. This sort of talking point issue has fallen off. But you know, the the typical talking point of pre-orders are bad early access is like the mother of all pre-orders. Are you fucking kidding me? Right? A game that goes into early access is explicitly a game you're paying for, but you are paying for not the like for like the promise of a release piece of content 2 or 3 years from now that's going to look vastly different than what you currently have, right? Um, I think that's a terrible idea for most developers and for most gamers, to be quite honest, right? Um, and it's kind of wild to me that no one thinks through to that sort of. It's just like I don't know. It's that thing about early access is the mother of all pre-orders. Just like ruins
No,
me.
I mean, I think the more basic version of this is that like, and I actually don't think there's much risk from the consumer side in this way. It's actually like, if you would like to kill every indie developer, you want games to look like Baldur's Gate, right? Because like there are plenty of games that are even good, right? That will come out and like not make gangbusters money, right? And if they have been in development for 6 years, right, and developer took a loan or something, or like like they're not going to survive that if it does. Like Baldur's Gate is like breaking records, and that's why this works. And they were confident in that, and they probably had enough capital from the first two games and like enough fan goodwill. Like these things together allow them to do Baldur's Gate 3 correct, right? Like you could like actually, I think the easy thing to point to is like Cyberpunk 2077, which might be good in a month when like Phantom Liberty comes out, right? Like,
True.
Cyberpunk 2077 is like the Dark Mirror version of Baldur's Gate 3, right? Had all the hype, right? And like just kind of like wasn't there on launch, right? Like has effectively been in early access for 2 years while they fixed the game, right? Like No Man's Sky is another version of this, right? Like so that is what like the Baldur's Gate development model kind of looks like. Like because it's not like we looked. It's not like Cyberpunk 2077 was like in like was like it had a I think it had a longer development cycle than Baldur's Gate 3 even, right? Like it's not just like people can get the time and it's fine. It's just a risky proposition, right? You need a company like Cyberpunk 2077, which is like still making money hands over fist on Witcher 3 in such a way that like they're like doing re-releases of it still, right? It's like the Skyrim of Eastern Europe.
What is the name of the Cyberpunk team? Do you remember offhand?
CD Projekt Red
CD Projekt Red.
with a K in project. Um, so like they also run GOG, right? Like they are that's like also where they're getting. This is like like if Half-Life 3 ever comes out, right? Like will it be Baldur's Gate 3 or will it be Cyberpunk 2077, right? Like and like Cyberpunk 2077 might be good, right? Like Baldur's Gate 3 has a bunch of bugs. Doesn't make me the happiest, but also it's not big enough deal that I care that much, right?
This is also the wildest thing, by the way. I wish it's crazy to me people are talking about this in this way. I have heard the phrase Baldur's Gate 3 is really polished. When I'm like, this is one of the least polished experiences I have ever played through in my fucking life. I am constantly running into bugs and issues. And frankly, I would say all of these don't matter, right? When I'm dealing with bugs, like when I was dealing with bugs when we're releasing stuff with Aquapara, one of the things we do is we measure intensity, right? There are certain bugs that it's a matrix. It is frequency by intensity, right? A high intensity bug is one that's like it crashes your game no matter what, right? A high frequency bug is it's happening to every player worldwide. A low frequency bug is it's only happening to a specific subset of players in a specific subset of circumstances, right? And you just kind of filter bugs by, okay, what are the highest intensity, most frequent bugs, and you bug fix your way sort of down from there, right? Most of the bugs I'm running into in Baldur's Gate are low intensity bugs for me. I can't tell frequency, obviously. I don't know who else is dealing with, but like it's stuff like, a thing gets destroyed, but I don't see the animation play, so it looks like there's a bridge when there's not. A like a little visual artifact of some piece of my character, like the way that my helm fits on my character creates these little floating rings because some piece of the artifact isn't like or some artifact of that it just like isn't working in cutscenes, right? It's there are some weird. I've had weird dialogue and quest triggers that I think have borked some of my quests, to be honest with you, but I kind of can't know because I'm trying to keep it like spoiler free or whatever, right? But it's like, things where we'll pass into a new zone and characters will come to me and they will say just wild things and I'm just like, what are you fucking talking about? And I realize that I have triggered some quest trigger that I couldn't possibly have comprehended. And I think that it's sort of bugging out. There's weird stuff with AI, where the AI for the game, if you're fighting, and you hide behind a wall, the AI won't go through the door. They will path into the wall on the other side of the thing, and they just won't. But they won't be able to hit you. So, like tons of stuff like that. Pathing bugs, right? Lou in the chat message. Pathing bugs are most of my bugs. I've run into a zillion of these, right?
I've run
Not a
into
polished.
one very bad bug.
Oh,
This is
really?
attacked me yesterday. So basically, like cloud syncing gets stuck. Like syncing the saves gets stuck, and like I lost an hour of gameplay yesterday because I couldn't get it to stop. And I had to like go to main menu and back in, and it like had reverted me to like because it won't let you save while it's syncing. Um, and
Wow.
I since look there's like a workaround. Basically, you turn on for anybody at home that's experiencing this. Apparently, if you just like keep toggling off on and off cloud sync, it'll eventually stop trying to sync and let you save. But yeah, no, that really sucked. Um, yeah, yeah. Lou says in the chat, I've started having bad cloud sync issues. First one didn't happen at all. Now it just takes like a full minute for each save. Yeah.
Oh, I bet I know what's going on, to be honest with you. I know a lot about save sync issues from one of our other games. I bet the save files for this our game are huge, and big game files make for tough syncing
Right. Yeah, that
because,
makes sense.
most game files are tiny, just like, whatever, like 6 kilobytes or something like that, right? But if the save files for this are as big as I would expect them to be, because it's such a gigantic game, right? And, you're quick saving a million times exactly. I
Oh
also totally,
yeah, that's a good fucking point. Oh man, are they syncing all of the saves? That seems like a mistake. Um,
That's what I bet is happening. It's basically, the quick save servers, or I'm sorry, the cloud save servers are expecting to be dealing with very small amounts of data, and it can just really quickly go, is this? Okay, cool. Move on. Most games
oh
will work like
man,
that, but if you have a big size save, it will take a ton of time,
I
and
wonder.
yeah.
I wonder if it's trying to sync the entire list of saves every time. I could believe that. Like that sounds like a very easy way to get yourself in a lot of trouble. Um,
Yeah, and I bet you could run into issues where maybe like I don't even know, like maybe like you find some kind of weird conflict, right? Where it doesn't know how to parse out a conflict with the like imagine it's taking forever to do a sync and you quick save while it's syncing. Now there's a new save that it doesn't recognize. Like I could easily see something like that just like completely bork it.
yeah, yeah. But it doesn't let you save, which is the crazy part, right? Like, which is
Yeah.
why I lost an hour of my.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I guess that would make sense.
Yeah,
But yeah. Anyway,
yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
back to the battle hit. It
But the
is
thing
not a
I think
particularly polished
when I
game.
think people are saying it's polished, right? When I think people are saying Baldur's Gate 3 is polished, they're not actually talking about polish, right? Polish is typically what we refer to when we think of like bug fixes and like quality of life stuff. This is also, by the way, some of the worst quality of life. Jesus Christ. I wish I could just like sit down and like do a UX pass, right, to explain just some of the systems that have eaten so much of my stupid time, like inventory management, just like makes me want to fucking shoot myself sometimes. And it's just like, like also not a lot of quality of life stuff, I would say, with how some of this stuff kind of like works, right? Like the idea that I have to talk to a companion to dismiss them, go pick up another companion in order to look at that companion's inventory, move something from A to B or like level them up or something like that. Like, Owlcat, we were talking about how Baldur's Gate is orders of magnitude larger than Owlcat. Owlcat had a system in Kingmaker, its first Pathfinder game, that allowed you to access all of your characters' inventories, and all of your characters' kind of stats pages all from one menu, so that you never had to deal with kind of this issue of like, you know constantly talking about getting people in and out of your getting people in and out of your party. What I think people are talking about when they're talking about polish is they're talking about the breadth of options
Yeah,
available, right? Because I think everyone has this sort of fantasy of an RPG where you can do literally everything, right?
where you can play it like a
I'm
tabletop.
Right, where you can play like a tabletop, right? For a lot of people, the magic of a tabletop is that there are no bounds, right? The bound is the GM, and theoretically, the GM could like rocks fall, everybody dies, or character something like that. But at the end of the day, the GM is a person, and the theater of the mind is malleable, so the GM can react appropriately to sort of any decision that any individual character makes, right? And in fact, I would say good role playing and good sort of interaction with a role playing system includes players proactively doing that sort of thing, right? When players play tabletop like a video game, it tends to be pretty boring and bad because you're essentially turning yourself into just sort of like an algorithm, right? I aim at highest health target and I make my attack, right?
And you're
Um,
playing a game system which isn't particularly mechanically deep because it's built to be like human resolvable in a quick period of time, right? Like
Yes, exactly, right? So I'm thinking about stuff like, like in one of the first D&D games, I think I ever played with you actually. I don't know if you were there for. Do you remember Sam Nastasi's did you ever play his RA room when we were in
I played a
college?
Warhammer 40K game with you guys once where I was like a psyker.
Oh yeah, I also played that game.
Yeah, it was like you, me, Waylon, and Sam, and
Oh my
somebody else, and
god.
Nick. I think Nick.
Wayland, yeah, it would have been Nick and Matt, right? I think that's how his
Yeah, yeah,
residents
you're
were.
right.
Yeah,
Yes.
because they were his residents at the time. I remember we once had a game where we were hired to take out some rats, some dire rats that had burrowed into the basement of a tavern, right? Like the most basic sort of shit. I was playing a druid at the time, and I had this ability called, I think it was like explosive acorn or something like that, and another ability called thorn whip, or maybe it was vine whip, something like that. No, Vine Whip would be the Pokemon version. It was Thorn Whip, right? And I did this thing where the rats, by the way, turned out to be were rats, which was very cool at the time. Kudos to you, Sam. I know you're not listening, but whatever. Um, where I threw my explosive acorn under one of the store shelves in order to knock the shelf down and trap the rat underneath it, right? And then we did something with the floor. We like electrified the floor, or it was like we broke a water cask, and then there was stuff on the floor, and then someone electrified that water, and then I thorn whipped to a rafter in the ceiling. Though it wouldn't be a rafter, it was a basement. Come on, Sam. A rafter in the ceiling to swing over to the bookshelf to kill the were rat. It's like that's the stuff you can't program a computer to react that until now, right? Like until Baldur's Gate, where kind of you can do a lot of different stuff. It seems as though they have tested for so many different ways to approach any individual issue, any individual problem, right? And it gives you the freedom to do that in a way that previous CRPGs have attempted and tried to sort of like embody. I'm thinking about like Dragon Age Origins would be a pretty good example. Dragon Age Origins, I think, is a very good game. Well, actually, I think it's a very okay game, but it's very ambitious. Is really what I'm going to get to. And there are a lot of different ways to solve problems, right? You can attack things, in a myriad of different sort of ways. But the web of decisions in Dragon Age Origins is so different than in Baldur's Gate 3. And a lot of that has to do with just like their true embrace of some of the crazy stuff that you can do in D&D that is ridiculous to handle in computer games. Like the power of Speak with Dead, I did not quite conceptualize that power until last night when we started Speaking with Dead, and it's just like, holy fuck, they are real robust about this system.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. There's been a lot of that kind of thing, right? Like, although I did get disappointed once because I found like a dead person, and I was like, "Speak with dead," and it's like this corpse has nothing to say to you. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I
um,
mean, there's stuff about the story in Baldur's Gate that I think I have answers to, minor stuff to be fair, that I think I have answers to because we chose to speak with dead on a random corpse on the side of the road, and it actually explained a not a like a crucial plot point, but like a crucial story beat. You don't really think about it, but like then you talk to this guy and he explains himself and you're like, "Oh, this is the guy that did that thing. I didn't even realize." But that makes
yeah,
total
yeah,
sense, right? Like that feeling is all over Baldur's Gate, which is really kind of nuts.
yeah. And I also enjoy that like you were talking about how like you're not like you're trying to feel your way through it and not look stuff up. I think it's like also kind of paramount because like there are so many things that happen in that game that's like, you know what? It's not for this character, right? Like I found like a burrow and it's like I can't fit in there. I tried shrink, like, reduce person on myself, and that was still wasn't small. I was like, you know what? This is for a character that could probably turn into a squirrel. I can't do that. I'm not gonna force it. Right? Like um
Yeah. Yeah, and it also has a lot of opportunities for you to feel very clever, right?
yeah.
There's a whole section of the game that I basically unlocked because I used it wasn't a scroll of gaseous form. I was just gash. I think we just had a caster in the party at the time, and it was just like, oh, I understand. And we turned this guy into a gas, and it just solved the whole essentially puzzle, right? And we were kind of halfway through figuring out that puzzle on our own. I think we would have gotten there, but it was just that moment of, oh, I think I can sort of get to the bottom of this. That we did do that, right? That just feels, like that stuff just feels really good.
Yeah.
And
Or like you can jump a lot of places, right?
Oh yeah,
Like I
yeah.
I like got one of the party members I think just a touch early because I like jumped from the back of something like across a bunch of different stuff. And it's funny because like my main character is pretty good at jumping, so I usually have him jump, and then I have to like figure out how to waddle both of them, like whoever I'm with back to like the main party. But yeah,
What is your main character?
he's based on one of my Pathfinder 2 characters. He is a half orc wizard that I've built as kind of like a punch mage, but like he's not very good at it, but it's fine.
Okay. Yeah, sure, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I think players are talking about polish for Baldur's Gate 3, I think that's the stuff they're
Yeah.
talking about, right?
I agree.
That it is, and to be fair, I think some of that stuff is possible because of unique stuff to our market. For instance, I don't think I think one of the craziest things about video game development today that people don't think of or realize is the explosion in voice acting talent. The ability to get your game voice acted is way easier and way cheaper today than it was 10 or 20 years ago, right? Which I think helps stuff like Speak with Dead, right? Because part of what makes Speak with Dead so tough is you need to hire a gazillion voice actors, right? Or you
Yeah.
need to get time on really expensive voice actors, right? Which is really tough, right? But now there's a lot of voice acting talent. People who want to break into the wide world of voice acting, and the way that they do it is by taking. I don't want to say like cheap, but cheap contracts, right, for games like this, just to be additional voices, right? To
Or
be the
like
corpse that says,
just like
whatever.
parts on contract. My girlfriend is like doing some voice acting as like a side hustle, right? Like there's a site
Really?
that like just like puts up contracts for it, right? And you can audition for them. And I don't think she's done a ton yet, but it's like a thing she decided one day she wanted to try out, and she just could, right? Like it's like, and I don't think a lot of that stuff is like bubbling up to the Baldur's Gate 3 level, right? But like that kind of like baseline lets things get easier, right? And then like next couple years, a lot of that's gonna be replaced by like actually free AI generated voice stuff, right? Like we're like
Yeah.
very very reduced costs. Um, so it's
Yeah, I think one thing is the writing costs on this stuff is non-trivial, right? And I have also seen, I don't know, people are obviously very aggressive about ChatGPT and AI stuff or whatever. I have expressed my skepticism before on the podcast. I don't really think that AI is sophisticated enough to replace a lot of writing, but who knows? Maybe we'll get there.
yeah. I
Um,
think it's a force multiplier, right? It makes writing this stuff faster, right? Like you can ask it for a first draft, and that's faster than writing it all from your own.
Yeah, that is definitely true, right? It is much quicker to edit a first draft generated by something like ChatGPT than it is to sort of like generate something on like on your own.
From full
And
cloth,
I
yeah,
bet like kind of the words per minute of a writer working with ChatGPT as a base is going to outpace a writer working on their own by
yeah. Especially when you have to do like
several
rote
folds.
stuff, right? Like
Yes.
um, that should be yeah. Oh man,
Especially because
yeah.
especially as someone who spends a lot of my day writing and reviewing other people's writing, your penchant for falling into like traps, or like not traps, but like it's like euphemisms, right? Like obviously there are euphemisms that are part of my speech and the way that I structure my sentences that trickle down into my writing in a way such that um, is both unique to my writing, but it is also like a repetitive sort of thing, and you can kick yourself out of those sorts of habits by using those kinds of like tools. I think, which is
Yeah,
really
yeah.
useful, right? Because another danger is that you're a guy, you're sitting at a Jira thing and you're looking at tasks to write the corpse speech for all of these different corpses, right? Um, it's easy to get lazy with some of that stuff. And so having a tool there to sort of like, I don't know, mix it up is pretty useful. The other piece that I think is actually pretty important to Baldur's Gate 3 success, but that I also think is it's kind of like nitroglycerin in a way, very powerful but very volatile, is the community feedback that they were able to take, right? I think a lot of what makes Baldur's Gate so successful are these different paths that you can take to your goals, right? But I actually think that a lot of that has to do with having a game deep in early access that you can watch so many people play, and you can get feedback from somebody that goes, I wanted to talk to that cow, maybe that cow would have an answer for me, right? Or I want to be able to talk to that squirrel, right? Because I think it'd be cool if that squirrel, I could use talk with animals on the squirrel would tell me, this piece of like the quest or whatever. I bet a lot of that stuff actually came out via playtesting, just because when you have the ability to see what hundreds of different players do to approach your problems, obviously good game design is going to shuttle those players, generally speaking, onto the railroad, right? I bet most players are going to man, I don't even know how much I can talk. Do you have withers in your party? Do you, or not in your party, but at your camp?
Yes.
Okay. I bet most people are going to find a way to get withers, right? But I bet some people are going to miss him, right? And you can look at that data, right? In order to understand, okay, I get it, right? The people go to this part of the map and they explore this part of the story first, right? In our first playthrough, we completely missed withers because we came to a lock. The lock had to be picked. We couldn't pick the lock at that moment, so we moved on and forgot about it, right? And we ended up hitting the Emerald Grove and getting a bunch of quests and doing all this other sort of stuff. And I just think all of that is pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean it's interesting because I hit that same locked door, and one of the characters said, "I wonder if there's another way around." Um, and I was like, "Oh," and that prompted me to go find another way around. Right.
I bet that note is me. I bet that character saying that voice line is from this note, right? Like, people are skipping, like this underground chapel and all of the bandits and stuff like that in it.
Yeah. No, I mean it's and there's like seven ways to get in there too, right? Like how did you get in on whatever playthrough you first got in with him?
I lockpicked it. Well, so my main game, I'm playing Zastiel, the Tiefling Rogue,
Uh,
who is super geared out for lockpicking. So I just picked the lock, right?
okay.
Because there is thieves tools nearby. We did eventually find
Yeah,
some
yeah.
thieves tools, and I just picked the lock, and we went right in it, and we killed them. We did the whole thing. And it was actually just the two of us. We didn't even have party members at the time because all of the party members are to the left of that
Right,
sort of
right.
area. We went and we explored that whole area, just the two of us, basically. Which, to be fair, was actually pretty fun and compelling because you're like level 2, level 1, maybe, and like not super strong. And yeah, and so all of that stuff was pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, if you go around, stop me if you don't want to hear, but there's a couple different ways to get in from the top side. Um,
Well, because there's the bandits, right?
there are bandits, and then there's like you can go through the bandits. You can there's like a way down that I discovered on my way out, and then there's also like a very obvious like a stone hanging above a crack in the floor. Um,
Uh-huh.
and you can like shoot the rope. Like this is like I
Yeah,
feel like this
funnily
is
enough, when I was doing that in our evil campaign the other day, where we're playing these evil characters, Rachel's character was standing on that stone when that floor broke, and so she fell into the next room while the rest of us were still on the top side fighting these bandits or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, the interesting because like that, like falling into that hole immediately started a fight with the bandits inside for me. So that was
Yep,
fun.
that is what she died pretty quickly, and then we had to finish the guys up top, and then did this whole thing by killing the guys in that room in order to get back to life. It's pretty funny, to be honest. But I feel like that is like very true to form for sort of like what D&D is and what
Yeah, yeah,
D&D kind of like feels like. And there's a lot of like little puzzles. One of the neat things is achievements in the game. There are things that Rachel and I have figured out, like puzzles that Rachel and I have figured out that our friends haven't figured. And I can see that because I can compare the achievements. I can see, oh, I got this achievement, right? But I know I saw that like Charles or Josh, they didn't get that achievement, right? And there's stuff that they've done that I haven't seen, right? Because they have hidden achievements that I don't know what that achievement is, but they got there and they did the whole thing. And I think that that kind of stuff is also like pretty interesting, pretty compelling. It's also pretty funny because it's dealing with like a piece of sort of the D&D lore and like Faerun and stuff like that that I'm actually not incredibly familiar with. I never liked Faerun. I never or Forgotten Realms, right? I always liked Eberron as like a D&D setting. So all of the D&D games I played during my big era were playing in Eberron games. And when D&D kind of got standardized to be in Faerun and Forgotten Realms, I had already sort of moved on to Pathfinder. So it's actually kind of interesting, like learning stuff about like the Githyanki, for instance, right? Like I've sort of known about the Githyanki as like a you know a species that exists, like a race that exists, but I never really comprehended the Githyanki until this game, where they're actually kind of getting like fleshed out with all of this lore that I have never seen before.
yeah. No, I mean it's interesting because I don't think I know a lot. Like I used to read the R.A. Salvatore books, but that was all like there have been two Crisis on Infinite Faerunes type things that have happened in the interim, like in like the world story lore that I just don't know about. Um, and so it's
Really?
interesting. Yeah, like well, I know a little bit about them, right? Like
Okay.
I think like divine magic disappears at some point and then comes back. And like I think they reference this pretty early in the game, right? They talk about like gods that have died. And I
Uh
think
huh.
that's part of it. And like I think there are like two big kind of resets that happen. Um, which I think was like a marketing thing from Wizards, but um, but yeah, no, it's
It's
interesting.
interesting.
I,
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
I'm
Go
I'm
for it.
saying I'm looking at these achievements, and there's one achievement that like 75% of people have, which involves falling down a hole, which I think is vague enough to not be a spoiler. Um, and then there's another one that only 40% of player has, which is rest 4 times, which is like wild to me. Long
Oh,
rest.
I actually, so I to be fair, I sort of get that. I have done so much in this game without resting. We did the entire goblin camp, I think, without taking a rest, including like boss fights, really difficult battles or whatever. But just like Rachel and I really hate long resting. And to be fair, I think as part of that is a
Yeah, I'm playing with Gale and I'm a wizard. So like, half of our resource and I also have Shadowheart, right? So like you need to reset those spell slots every once in a while.
yeah, like I think part of my thing is I hate the idea of easy. So Pathfinder did this in a way that I liked quite a lot, right? Which is that like you have to tackle problems, or I'm sorry, like Kingmaker, right? The Owlcat games. You have to tackle problems without resting too much, or else the problems like the severity of the problem increases, right?
Yeah.
Um, it is non-trivial to just to rest if you're clearing a dungeon, right? In the last dungeon that I did in Kingmaker, I did that in 2 days, like 2 rests, right? I cleared half the dungeon, I went outside and I cleared the other half of the dungeon. And stuff like traps resets, monsters respawn, like all of this other sort of stuff that just like make it tough for you to sort of like come back. And I feel like Baldur's Gate makes it very easy to sort of just rest at will, which is probably good in like a sort of player agency sense. Because I do think that I think the experience for you as a wizard probably is worse if you can't long rest all the time, right?
Yeah. Or at
Um,
least with
but
some frequency.
yeah, but like to me, it sort of feels like I don't know. There's some stuff that I've just like noticed. Like so, for instance, something that you can do inside of a long rest, you can just go to your party and recruit different. characters, right? You use up all of Shadowheart's spell slots, you go recruit Gale. You
Oh,
bring
you
him
switch
for
it
the rest
out.
of your
Yeah, yeah.
day, right? Or something that we did once. Actually, I think this happened in the Goblin Camp, to be fair. So we did abuse a kind of exploit in a way, not really an exploit, which was we went back to the camp, dropped one of our party members, picked up Shadowheart, and then walked Shadowheart over to that party member and just he did big AoE healing on everybody outside of combat, right? Prayer of healing just like is a big giant heal to get every, and it was just like Shadowheart was never in the party, but we used all of her spell slots, or not all of her spell slots. We probably used like 2 or 3 spell slots, right? Just to top the party off, kind of as like a makeshift short rest in a way. Before going back down and like fighting more guys, right? But in general, I like the sort of fantasy that, listen, if we're going and we're attacking this goblin camp, we're attacking this goblin camp. We're not abandoning it and coming back. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when you're doing the dungeon, you you have the option to short rest. I think that's kind of the idea behind short rest, and that's what makes short rests cool and interesting, kind of as a design feature. But it feels very weird to me when we're like deep in the thick of it, and oh, I'm just gonna pop out to camp, right? And we can just like take a long rest in the middle of all of this action and drama.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree mostly, but like it's it's I don't know. It's interesting. You talk about doing the Goblin Camp. You and I probably have very different experiences with the Goblin Camp.
Oh, I have done the Goblin Camp 3 different times at this point.
Okay.
So, the way that we did the Goblin Camp as essentially a dungeon by just killing everybody, was the second time I did the Goblin Camp.
Okay.
And then the third time we did the Goblin Camp, we did it also. Well, the third time we did the Goblin Camp, we did it pretty straightforward, but just with a different effect.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I'd rather have the option than have to redo an hour of the campaign because when the fight went poorly, Dream members. Yeah, no, I mean, but I think that's like Louis says in the chat. This, sorry. I think that's fair, but I also think that's like what I think that's what you're getting at, buddy. Right? Like you should have to. That's the thing that you want to fall back on when you have to, rather than a thing that you want to.
Yeah, but really what I'm explaining is my philosophy. I think
Yeah.
our philosophy behind me and Rachel taking very few long rests, right, is sort of this immersive thing. Because I think the thing, I don't want to talk too much about like the quality of the game. We're gonna do another podcast
Yeah.
actually talking about like the game itself or whatever. But to me, Baldur's Gate 3 is sort of the second coming of Skyrim in feeling, right? In the sense that it is about that feeling of just total sensory immersion, right? And just losing yourself in hours and hours of this game because it so effortlessly creates a world around you, right? We played we played that evil campaign this weekend. We must have played for 10 hours straight, right? And it's just like it's so easy to do that with Baldur's Gate. And the last time I really had that feeling was with Skyrim. And I think it's the magic of Skyrim, right? I've talked about Skyrim being one of the greatest games of all time for that reason. And so I think that really what I w- the, my, the, what I'm describing sort of the cornerstone of this sort of like philosophical underpinning, rather than a recommendation, because I understand that there are players who are different than me and are probably interfacing with the game in different ways, right? Like one of the things that I recommend at the top of the podcast is to not spoil yourself on everything and figure it out for yourself, because I think that's really fun and rewarding. But I also understand that there are players who I am friends with, right? Who are the kinds of players who look things up and are on the subreddit and are talking, like I have a friend who went to Withers and respect Shadowheart because if you make Shadowheart a different domain of cleric, she's actually a much more powerful cleric and a better like member of your party and stuff like that. It's like I would never do that. Are you kidding? I would never want to do that. She is a specific follower of a specific god, and her trickery domain is a specific sort of manifestation of that god, right? It is lore breaking in a way to me, um to want to take Shadowheart and make her a different, like make her a different version of a cleric. But I understand that there are players who are not like me and they interface with the game differently. So I understand why the systems are as they are. It actually sort of reminds me of Fallout New Vegas had this. They had survival mode, right? Which was a specific difficulty mode that added a bunch of riders onto the game, which was, I think it was Chris Avalon. Um,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
am I
that
thinking
sounds about right. Yeah.
of, I think he's the guy. If he is who I'm thinking, game director on uh Fallout New Vegas. He basically wanted a much more brutal version of Fallout New Vegas. Um, and they added this system to account for that basically. Um, and I feel like I wish that Baldur's Gate had something kind of along this, right? Like one that put some, it puts some sort of like timer on when you're doing stuff so you can't short rest all the time, right? Or it puts some sort of restriction on when you can go to camp, right? You can only go to camp when you go outside and you walk away from like a dangerous
Mhm.
location or something kind of along those sorts of lines. That would be kind of representative a little bit of how
Yeah,
Kingmaker did it, which I tended to
are you
enjoy.
sure that's not the case? Just because like I have not looked anything up, so maybe I'm totally wrong. But like I am laboring under the fear that I'm going to long rest too many times, and then like a thing that is near a ritual that is nearing completion will complete without me having done anything about it. You tell me that never happens, I'll believe you. But I'm just
To be fair, I don't know. I don't long rest,
yeah,
so I, if it that maybe there is a ticking clock. I guess
Lou says it
it
happens.
happens. Okay, that's pretty interesting. There's a specific Act One clock that ticks. Who knew? I
Interesting.
am kind of interested in what the world looks like. And someone will die if you long rest too many times. Holy
I
shit,
bet you I
that's
know who that
also
is.
interesting.
I bet you I know who that is. Uh,
I had to back up half an hour because of it. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, part of it is like I guess part of it is the philosophy. There are also some key dialogue pieces, right? That pop up where someone has told me, "Hey, you need to not do this thing," right? Um, because if you, or you need to do this thing faster what he was saying. Um, and some of that stuff kind of like spurs you on. But yeah, I want to say probably in my game with Rachel, we probably only like long rested like 4 or 5. Um, it's very common for us to clear a dungeon up to a really difficult fight and then go, okay, let's long rest and tackle this thing, right? Um, and we then tackle the hardest fight and then go on and clear more dungeon.
Interesting. Uh, uh,
I
long
long
rest.
rested 2 times in 4 hours last night. You'd hate me, you know. I don't know what to tell you. You're playing a very different sort of game than me, and that's fair enough.
Interesting. So something I just want to share before we get off of this um, is there is an encounter very early on, like after the intro, where there's like a an elephant on the ground and you talk to it.
Uh-huh.
And I rolled a critical one on on the check to resist that. And so when I reloaded, I just had Asterion shoot it without walking up to it because I was like, "Fuck this."
Do you
'Cause
know what the critical one did?
yeah, no, it gamed over. It games you over. Like,
Really?
yeah, he like sucks your face, then it's like game over. You died.
Oh
'Cause
my god.
yeah. Although to come to think of it, now that I know how the controls work, I bet you I could have switched to a different party member and had them like beat him up. But they were just standing there. I'm like, why aren't you doing anything? Um, uh, but yeah, um, it's it's a fun. It's fun. I also have like made decisions based on like characters I like
Mm.
like I am only running Gale because I think he's cool. I like probably should be running Asterion in that slot, but he's kind of a dickhead, and I don't like him. So
I should be running Gale because he looks like me. That's the thing about Gale that I think is funny.
the thing about I just think Gale's a bro.
Mm.
Gale's like my favorite bro, and I don't care that we're both wizards. We're gonna be bro wizards, and we're gonna bro it out. Um,
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I'm playing a road, Rachel's playing a bard. She's running Karlak mostly in as like her extra
so
party member, but I swap around a lot.
what in your solo game? What's your party?
Well, I don't
Yeah.
really have a solo game. That's the
Okay.
thing. My solo game is the game I play with Rachel. Um,
Okay.
but I think if I were to play a solo game, I don't know. It depends. It depends on what my base class would be. Um, I've done a lot of stuff that's fun. Honestly, maybe the most fun I've really had. Sneak attacking stuff is really great. And I would highly recommend a rogue playthrough just because like being able to systematize some of the stealth rules is so good for D&D, right? Like I think one of the hard things about tabletop D&D is a rogue's ability to re-enter stealth and find hiding advantage in combat. But because a computer can just show you enemy sight lines, right? It can show you, oh, this is low light, right? And it's out of sight of everybody else. So what you can do is you can dash out of everybody's eye line and go back into stealth, right? And then get another pot shot off and trigger a sneak attack. And being able to do that has been really like fun and compelling because it does make you feel like the I don't know what I would call it, the hit and run sort of sneak attack skirmishing rogue that I've wanted to be. But I think the most fun I've had in terms of character is I just played a fighter. We did that in the evil game or whatever. And my fighter is just brutally powerful and very strong, and he takes hits real good, and he runs into combat and he beats people up with a great sword. Like a lot of this is because I had a hunch that something was cool and it ended up being even cooler than I thought. I won't spoil it, obviously. Or actually, maybe I should spoil it because you would have missed it. We killed the demon in the first, or I'm sorry, the devil in the first encounter. There's that level 8 devil. He's fighting the mind flayer.
Yeah.
When we did that, I was like, I wonder if we can kill that guy. And then we decided to all just like sit on top of him and kill him. And when you do, you can pick up his great sword, which is an ever burning great sword that has fire damage attached to it, right? So it's like a super powerful weapon for a level 1 fighter to have. And that stuff has been like fun. But I don't know. I think maybe in that sense, I would probably carry, I'd probably carry Asterion just because you need a rogue, somebody to do some lock picking. I like having somebody in melee with me would maybe be Karlak, maybe Will. I would do Will instead of Karlak, and then I would maybe do
Have you played
Gale.
much of Karlak? And like, so the nice thing about long resting is it advances storylines. Have you
Mhm.
done much of the Karlak Will storyline? Because that's fun.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did some of that stuff, which was really interesting. We fucked up some stuff with Karlak. Karlak pretty clearly is looking for a specific NPC, and I knew exactly what NPC she was looking for, but we had already completed that guy's quest, and he was like, "See you in Baldur's Gate." I was like, "Oh well, I guess we're not dealing with this until later."
Yeah, no, I went. I don't have a quest from him. Interestingly, um, I
For who? Karlak?
no for
I'm sorry.
the guy that Karlak you talked to for Karlak.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a quest from him. It is a quest that surrounds him,
Oh, okay, that
I
makes
guess.
sense. Yeah.
If you complete the quest surrounding him, he gets out of dodge, which is pretty
Okay,
funny.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my new thing is we have been trying to figure out. I don't know. I won't spoil too much stuff. Have you done? Do you know about the druid? They talk about the master who the goblins took prisoner, Halsin.
Yes, I know about him, and I suspect um so I don't know, so this doesn't count as a spoiler, but when Lou said somebody dies if you rest too many times, that's who I think is gonna die if I rest too many times.
Hmm.
He's the logical one to me.
I see. I do think he's a companion, but we haven't figured out how to make him a companion. And I do think we have fucked up the quest because he doesn't have the option to join like our party. He's in the camp and he has companion like voice options, but he can never actually get added to our party. And his quest is still open, right? And it's displaying some text that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, oh, we must have fucked up this quest trigger somehow, where his quest never completed and he
Lou
never
says in
got
the
added to
chat,
the
my
party.
theory is he's the bear I fuck, which that
Yep.
would make sense. That would make some sense.
Yeah, I mean, it might also be. I'm also thinking he is maybe on Act 2, which would make sense to me. Um, the other interesting thing is we opened up. We did the evil campaign. Where we sided with the goblins against the druids, which was pretty funny. And the evil goblin drow, I think, is also a companion.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure she joins the party because of how stuff works out. Stuff works out with her, but yeah, I don't know, man. There's a lot to talk about. We'll obviously get really big into it. I don't know that next week is appropriate. I'm actually not going to be able to play basically at all this coming week, but I feel like I want to come to the game when we have like put a lot of time into it or like deep into Act 2, maybe have beaten the game. I don't know what that would look like.
Buddy, you were
What?
talking about Skyrim. You know what comes out in 23 days?
Oh, Starfield.
Yes.
True. Whoa.
I would say
Huge.
like, and that's approximately, this is like the 7th year of this podcast. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, but like our first episode was like hype for Fallout 4.
Oh, that's true. And then Fallout 4 really disappointed me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Famously
yeah,
one of my most disappointing games. Even though I put like 150 hours into that game.
yeah,
Maybe 200 hours into that game. Because I went and I did a second playthrough after all the DLC had been released.
yeah. I
Um,
given what Baldur's Gate is, like, I have heard rumors about Starfield for like Starfield might be like Todd's magnum opus, right? Or at least it's what he wants it to be. Um, I want, I hope it's good. We'll see. I also haven't seen anything about Starfield, really, right? Like,
yeah, me neither. I also hope it's good. I think it's not going to be good. I'm a little bit of a doomer on Starfield. Um, because I haven't seen all that much of it. But it's possible. Hey, it could be.
yeah,
The thing that I like about it is it has core aesthetic that is just so fun, right? Of just a guy in a spaceship going to
yeah.
planets doing cool shit, right? That seems like a good time, right? We obviously did a whole podcast about how just that fantasy is like really alluring for kind of like stories. Is
The
Starfield on Steam? What can I see about it on Steam?
It's on PC Game Pass, which is how I'm going to be playing it.
Oh,
Uh,
I guess it will be on Game Pass. I guess I will play it. Wait, what?
uh,
Am I looking at Starfield footage right now? They have a developer thing with 36,000 people watching.
maybe are we over? Is there like Starfield news happening right now that we don't know about?
This can't possibly be Starfield. I must be looking at Elder Scrolls Online, right? Like I'm looking at basically an MMO boss like raid fight.
Do
This is previously aired Starfield Direct. I'm now seeing.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know what I'm supposed to get from these screenshots is part of my thing, right? Like what am I learning about this game um from these screenshots that I'm looking at? It's funny. This is like the exact opposite of the kinds of screenshots that I tell our developers to give me when we're publishing games. Like players don't want atmospheric vibes screenshots. They want crunchy screenshots about like what does the UI look like, right? What is like a moment of true full gameplay, right? Like what does it look like when stuff is like busy on screen? Um
yeah. The reason I am not a doomer about Starfield is my understanding is that this is Todd's baby. I don't think Todd will like let it come out bad. But
You know what? Fair enough. There's some gifts later on in the store page that do tell me a little bit, which I think is kind of interesting. Um, and just a guy and his bros in a spaceship is basically Mass Effect. It's what I want. It's what I want in my life. It's funny. We were talking about, I mean, Lou in the chat is talking about sex things. We were talking about romance, and I think romance is typically bad in most of these RPGs. I have a weird thing about this. I feel like I'm watching. Have you ever seen like creepy ASMR? I'm sorry, I shouldn't call these creepy ASMR. Um, like girlfriend videos. Have you ever seen any of these like on
yeah, yeah,
YouTube or
yeah,
something? Yeah, where it's just like a girl and is just like talking to you in ASMR and it's like it is you know what it is? It's the thing I said about Blade Runner 2049, right? Where I talked about the AI girlfriend in that movie, and he fucks the AI girlfriend in that movie, right? And I said at the time that I thought that this was a really smart rebuttal to that one weird movie about the guy fucking
her.
his computer. Yeah, her, right? In her, he doesn't fuck the computer, right? He thinks it's too weird. He doesn't go through with it. And I was like, I think humans are too depraved for that shit. He would have fucked her. Okay, that would have happened, right? And that's what he Blade Runner 2049 does, right? And I think that's I get that same creepy feeling sometimes when I'm going through these romances in like Baldur's Gate being the most recent sort of example. And I think Mass Effect changed that. Mass Effect is very different. But I think the thing that's different about Mass Effect is I am not truly role playing. I'm not like creating a character that is a cipher for me, right? I'm sort of gently guiding Shepard through their choices, right? Through the kind of like galaxy, right? When I choose a dialogue option on Shepard, Shepard says more words than the words I tell Shepard to say, right? Because it is a character with more thoughts in their brain than,
Yeah,
just yeah. That it was very easy for me to sink into the romances and go deep on the romances in there because I think that there's chemistry when it's two people and they're two characters. It's the same way that I watch Romeo and Juliet, right? And I can get into
sure. Yeah.
those things. The romances in Baldur's Gate or other games that are similar to it, Dragon Age Origins would be another good example. They always come off very weird to me. And I think maybe it's because the main character isn't voice acted. So I'm not watching a conversation. I'm having someone like sort of do ASMR to me. And I just find that very creepy and weird. And it's hard for me to get deep into the romance of like any of these kinds of games.
Yep. No, that makes sense to me. I don't know. I haven't gotten that deep in any of them. Um,
Okay.
Mostly because it feels weird. It's like, like I have had several options where it's like, it's like Karlak, too hot to touch, like literally, right? Like, and like I did some of her quest line, and it takes like a couple steps. Like it takes like another step past where I'm at to like make her like. And she's like, I just want a hug. And like one of my actions was like, I still can't touch you. Or like one of my voices, I was like, oh, I can't say that. That feels fucking weird, right? Like I will feel icky if I say that, right? Like,
Yeah, I also think that the dialogue options are like I sort of think these characters are a little too pushy, right? Um like I got the romance option from Late Cell very quickly. And I was like surprised, to be honest. It kind of goes from like, oh yeah, we're buds, we're companions on this party, let's fuck. And I'm just like, slow down, wine and dine a guy first, okay? Like,
I mean, I think it doesn't help that like several of the characters, like like Asterion and Shadowheart are like, like, it's good to do lots of fucks and not get in love, right? Like,
true.
like Asterion immediately came on to me, and I was like, you know what, buddy? You tried to slit my throat a half an hour ago. No, or you like threatened to slit my.
Did you let Assyrian bite you? Did you get the vampire bite?
No, I mean, I like fought him off. My punch wizard has high strength, so I fought him off when he tried to like stab me.
Oh, I never got him trying to stab me. He
Oh,
just
so like
wanted.
when he first calls over to you, he's like, "There's a imp
Oh,
over
I
there."
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so he like, and I failed the perception check, and he got me like, and so I just like, "Fuck you," and because of that, I don't want him in my party anymore because he's kind of a dick.
So now that you have a high strength, are you shoving people off of cliffs? How's shoving people
Yes,
going for you?
shoving and jumping is great. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
The funniest thing is I have been shoved to my deaths a couple of times, and I'm just like, this is such bullshit, right? Like, and it's like me, like reaping, like or sowing. Fuck yeah, this is awesome, right? Me reaping.
man,
This sucks. I'm so mad.
Lou mentioned Spider Mommy in the chat before, and I was like, I was so mad because it was like I had her on an edge of like, oh boy, time to push her off. It's like too big to shove. It's like bullshit, bullshit.
The funny thing is, I had Will in my party for a while. And as a warlock, you can give him a push on his Eldritch blasts, and I was just becoming a push monster with this guy, where it was just like, I'm just gonna push everybody off of everything, right? But then like when you push people into chasms, you obviously don't get their shit, and I was like, maybe we should stop pushing people into like.
Yeah, that's why I like the spider area because there are a lot of like you could just like hit the spider web bridges. I did that a lot, and like I did a fair amount of damage to the spider boss that way.
Yeah, when they fall.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you're not into anything, just like they fall on the ground and it does some damage. Nice. Uh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we're almost like at the end of even our extended time. What
True.
else?
I mean, I guess our weeks was a lot of Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, yeah. I played some more Street Fighter. I fought the streets.
I've been
Um,
playing a bunch of Hearthstone. Warrior's the worst deck in Hearthstone. I'm mad about it. Oh god, it happened again. They tried to make Control Warrior good, and it's not good.
I'm sorry. I
I
feel
know.
your pain.
Ah.
I have been contemplating building just the. So there is, I think I've shared it with you. There's a video by MTG Remy
Mm.
called Supreme Verdict that it came out like 2 or 3 months ago at this point. And it's basically a song. It's like an original song about how like Azorius is the greatest. And the last time he did a song that got stuck in my head, I built the my commander deck, that the ramp commander deck.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
The islands guy,
yeah. And
the
so
Tyrant Gyre, I think is his
yeah,
name.
yes, yeah. AC the guy or tyrant, yes. And so now I just kind of want to build like a filthy Azorius deck, Azorius commander deck, whose job like who won't even try and win, and will just make everybody miserable.
There is a deck set. Do you know? Have you ever heard the term stacks?
I know so the difference is Stacks attempts to win, right? It attempts to like build solitaire and win, right? I'm just talking about a deck. Like first of all, I don't think you can you run Stacks in Commander? I thought that was like a modern thing, or like
No, yeah,
a
you can. Well, it is different. Um, it's some different pieces. I
okay,
don't think all of stacks, the traditional stacks is available to you in Commander, because some stuff I think is banned in Commander. But like stacks is just the arc. It's like calling a deck burn, right? A
right.
stacks deck is any deck that just tries to lock your opponent out by
Right, so
making it impossible for them to play anything.
but sorry, but not that like the specific cards be locked out, but like you can't be reliable enough to like get like I to get Stacks to like go off in a consistently winnable way. Was my thought, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a certain amount of redundancy. It's a certain amount of just kind of like
Sure.
finding different stacks pieces that aren't necessarily stacks pieces, right? Like Trinisphere is one which I don't think it would get any play in modern, but like is Trinisphere says anything played for less than 3 CMC gets played for 3, right? So if you want to play a I don't know, a what's like a shock, you have to pay 2 in a red instead of just a red, right? It just taxes really low cost stuff. Obviously there's like Winter Orb and shit like that. Oh, Winter Orb, yeah, they can't have more during there. Like that's a pretty there's a lot of tutor stuff.
Right.
Let me just see. Stacks Commander.
Huh. I assume that like Winter Orb would be expensive. It is not.
Has it been reprinted a bunch maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the best stacks commander is blue white, Grand Arbiter Augustine, uh, which just makes everything your opponents cast cost one more to
Oh yeah.
cast. Which
Yeah.
is from the lore of what Supreme Verdict is coming, because Supreme Verdict I think is from a Ravnica set, and it is an Azorius spell. Grand Arbiter Augustine is obviously
And
the
Grand
leader
Arbiter,
of the Azorius.
I believe that Grand Arbiter Augustin is also like expensive. Oh no, it's not that expensive.
Yeah, he's like $2. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Well, you know, now you've given me bad ideas to go build like the most filthy. I don't even want to like. There is a part of
Who
there,
would want to play with you? Come on, like.
there is like the Dave inside of me that just like wants to come out and like be like fuck you, just especially since like Josh fucked me when we were playing our sealed deck. It's just like sometimes some men just want to watch the world burn. Oh man. Uh, but yes, I recommend the song "Supreme Verdict" by MTG Remy to everyone. I'll put a link in the description if I remember.
Okay.
Yeah. What else? I don't know. I haven't been doing a ton else of super deep relevance. My girlfriend's cats are here. They're nice. I like to pet them.
How are you enjoying some cats? Are we gonna watch Blue Beetle? Blue Beetle came out over the weekend, but I
Oh,
didn't watch
what?
it.
It's already out. Oh man, shows you how like where my mind's at.
Maybe this week we should try and do Blue Beetle, and then we'll do Blue Beetle on Monday, because I can probably fit a movie, but I'm not gonna play like any fucking Baldur's Gate, I don't think,
Okay.
this whole week. And then after that, maybe we can do our Baldur's Gate episode after doing a little bit more.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. When does Aquaman come out?
Aquaman is Christmas.
Okay. All right. Well. Oh. Somebody. Oh no.
Yeah,
It was
December
still light up.
20th.
Yep. All right. Well. You do anything else for your week you want to talk about?
I don't know. I mean, I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone. Honestly, I've been playing Battlegrounds, and it's pretty bad for me. I'm at the point where I had a lot of fun with Battlegrounds when I was winning all the time, and um,
Stopped winning and stopped having fun.
I stopped winning, and I got what's my highest rating? I got 6386. Seems to be the highest my rating had ever gotten. 6,000 rating is actually pretty damn high, to be honest. Most battleground streamers that I was paying attention to seem to kind of be in that zone. But my climb up to 6K rating was just like it was like full of like wins. And I think that's just like what I'm like dealing with is the like, oh, it was so fun just like stomping on these kids.
Yeah. No. I mean, kind of similarly, I am starting to hit the wall in Street Fighter. I'm at like gold 3, and I need to put in some serious lab time. And it's just kind of like, well, but I only have like a little bit of time to put into it, so I want to like actually play matches, but I need to like sit down and get the lab time in. By the
I'm
way,
looking at oh, I'm looking on my Firestone, my Battlegrounds thing. My first game in Battlegrounds, I got first place. My second game, I got first place. Third game, second. Fourth game, fourth. Then first, third, second, first, second. It's just like clearly what happened. Wow, I literally won every game I played up to 4K rating. Jesus Christ. Yeah, that so clearly what was happening was I was just like I got really sucked in because it was just so easy to win, I guess, at that lower MMR.
fair enough. Like that's the way to do it, right?
I guess so, yeah.
So, have you seen anything about Project L? This is the League of Legends
Oh, so
fighting
yeah,
game.
Yasuo. He was at Evo, right? Did you
Yeah, I was at Gen
are
Con during
you
Evo,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. Are you gonna go hard for it? Is that your shit?
I am excited because so it's simple execution, so it's a hyper fighter, right? Like there's like all sorts of mechanical complexity that isn't execution based. The thing I am so excited for is the thing that everybody has always said about fighting games versus like League of Legends is you can't blame your teammates. It's always on you. There is 2-on-2 in League of Legends. It's a tag fighter, and each person plays one side of the tag. The amount of they managed to put League of Legends salt into fighting games, which is already salty, right? Like the salt is going. I am so excited for just the heinous amount of scrub quotes that is going to come out of this fucking game.
Yeah. Okay. Honestly, I will maybe play that game when it does come out. Yasuo's in it, right? That was the
Yeah,
big reveal at
Yasuo.
Evo is that Yasuo. I'm sure he's impossible. I'm gonna be dog shit, but he
Yeah,
was my
well, so
favorite character.
this is the thing, right? Like it's a lot about technical knowledge, right? And a lot about like it's about so somebody has always or what a thing I've heard bounced around is like Street Fighter is like speed chess with an execution component, right? The execution component is so minimal in Project L because it's all like direction. It's like smash inputs basically, right? And there's not a lot of like extra tech that you can get in a 2D fighter style thing, like on like Smash
Yeah.
Bros, which has like advanced tech to it. And so I am super excited just to see how it all like to see how it works. Just like you watch some of the gameplay, it's like if you've ever seen like Marvel vs. Capcom or Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom or MVC3, like these are like one or two touch games, meaning like the number of times you need to get hit before you die is relatively low, right? And there's just like so many like gnarly movement options, right? That like it seems like they've managed to develop a game that has like the deep complexity of a traditional fighting game while also being able to shave off all of that execution requirement. Um, so I'm excited for that. Also, it's free, right? Like we all expect it to be free. I don't think they're going to charge for it. So
Yeah.
I will I will definitely give it a try. Um, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, I did see also in fighting game news that they're doing another Nickelodeon Star Brawl.
Yeah,
They're
that
doing
also looks very
a
good. Yeah.
2. Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like Squidward's gonna be one of the characters apparently. So
I'm told people are hyped for it. I couldn't possibly understand. I was reading these Twitter threads and I was just like, God, everybody like I was like, people like this game, but apparently the first one got a decent fan base.
so the first one was done. I think it's done by the people who did Smash City, which is like another kind of
Mm,
like small but popular Smash type. And one was fun, but it lacked some stuff like voice acting and whatever. And so I think people are hoping that two delivers on the promise, like on the promise of one essentially.
yeah, I
It's
mean, I definitely
weird.
want to hear SpongeBob laugh at me with his taunt button as he shoots me off the edge or whatever.
It's funny because like the other one with the WB game, why can't I remember the name of it? Uh,
Multiverses.
multiverses. Like that kind of sort of got unreleased.
Really?
Well, no, so it is. It was in beta, and now it is out of beta, and it's going to come into full release sometime next year, is what they say. And everybody's kind of like, huh, weird. Because people spent like real money on it, right? Like,
Yeah.
right, like, you know, hearts out to Rumbleverse, which refunded everybody's money and definitely shut itself down. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see. Like, it's interesting that these kind of like games that had a lot of hype around them, they were like fun to play, just like didn't have a ton of staying power, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things I remember was Black Adam came out um in Multiverses right alongside the movie, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually pretty interesting." Like that's a pretty compelling sort of thing that you can do, right? Is when a big movie comes out, you can put you can put out a new guy who ties into that sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, because like the
stuff.
first version that was kind of like LeBron James from like Looney Tunes or from Space
Oh,
Jam.
right, yeah, from Space Jam. Yeah, I did actually forget about that. That's true. But yeah, I guess true. Last played a year ago for me. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, you can't play it now, right? Like, I guess maybe they wanted to get like maybe they didn't want to have to release an Ezra Miller character. That's why they unreleased it.
No. Holy fuck.
um,
It's brutal.
yeah. Well, we're at time, and I should probably go. So I'm going to call it here, unless you have anything else you want to talk about.
No, I'm good. Yeah, let's go.
All right. Well, if you'd like to email about us about any of the things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at dripsplagames@gmail.com or podcast@dripsplagames.com. You can follow us on twitch.tv/dripsplagames or youtube.com/@somedripsplagames. These go out live. Rate, review us and everywhere you find podcasts. All the links are down in the description. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have nothing I'm looking to promote this week.
All right. Awesome. Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.